I'm the Purchasing Director for L'Oréal UK and Ireland. They have a turnover in excess of £36 billion and they have nearly 40 brands now in their portfolios. I operate at speed. The vast majority of the job is selling internally, not so much externally. I'm a details person. I like data. I like numbers. I'm a problem solver. It's all about the sales pitch, how you're selling your solution to those individuals and why they should buy into your recommendation. I think passion goes a long ways. People buy into people.
Exactly, 100%.
Negotiations don't happen in one meeting. Negotiations take months and months of planning, preparation. They're collaborative, they're teamwork. So I grew up, my parents owned their own business and they've built a very well regarded business where I grew up.
Yep.
And I really learnt the importance of building relationships with your customers. And I saw how important it was to be honest in business. How can I learn as much as I can learn? How can I get as much exposure as I can get? You need to be authentically yourself and you need to really be coming at it from the right angle. Yeah. If you don't share that vulnerability, you're never going to get that true trust from each other and nobody's perfect. However, there is a line that you can't cross.
Hi, I'm Marco Marambe, Managing Director of Procurato. In this podcast series, we're spending time with procurement and supply chain leaders, and we talk about their career and how they got to the top of the chain. Join me as we go through their journeys and their tips and advice on how to get to where they've got to. Hi, today we're here with Gemma Bell. Gemma is the Director of Procurement at L'Oréal. Hi, Gemma.
Hi.
Hi, good to have you here, and thanks for making it for us. Appreciate it. We're just talking about how busy schedules can be managed. Gemma, so I start with asking the question around what you are proud of in the role that you're currently doing, and also what your team has achieved. But of course, for those who somehow live under a rock and have never heard of L'Oréal, be good to have a little bit of an introduction to the company as well.
Yes, no problem. So I'm Gemma. I'm the Purchasing Director for L'Oréal UK and Ireland. L'Oréal are the global leader in the cosmetics industry. So they have a turnover in excess of £36 billion and they have nearly 40 brands now in their portfolio, spanning the whole market of the beauty industry. So yeah, big organization.
Big organization.
Yes.
That's great.
My role, as I mentioned, is the Procurement Director for UK and Ireland. I report into the UK CFO, but I also sit on our European zone leadership team, setting the vision and the direction for our European zone, where we spend in excess of £4 billion with our third-party suppliers.
Wow.
My team, I've been at the organisation now for coming up 10 years.
Amazing.
And I'm really proud of the transformation journey that we've done at L'Oréal. We've taken the team from that very transactional buying team, not very well engaged with the organisation, very focused on the retail and promotional spend, to a best-in-class strategic procurement team that are really seen as business partners for L'Oréal. So it's been a huge transformation journey. Our remit covers marketing and digital, your retail spend on your business corporate services.
Okay, that's really a big role to undertake, and of course, over the 10 years, transformation is continuous, and I like the fact that you probably have seen an evolution on a continuous basis, and I'm sure we'll get into that. So, Gemma, if we were to ask your family and your friends to give us a little bit of a description of yourself, what would they say about you?
I would like to think they would both say the same, which is that I operate at speed. So I'm a very busy person. I'm a full-time working parent to 2 young children. So I'm in a very hectic stage of my life. But I've always enjoyed being busy, being active. Exercise is a real core aspect of where I kind of support my mental well-being. So I like to start the day with exercise, and I'm very much an organizer. So I organize my family, I organize my friends. One of my friends once put a strict rule in place. She's like, we're only allowed one morning and one afternoon activity a day, because I like to achieve a lot. But I would also love to think that they would say that I'm very kind, considerate, and very supportive friend and family.
Yes, successful mom, a busy organizer as well with your friends. So that's
Yeah.
that's really good. So Gemma, we like to get to know you as we continue this conversation. So if you want to start by giving us a little bit of background of yourself,
Yeah.
and then move into how you got into the world of work and the career, and how you got into procurement as well, and we can take it from there.
Excellent. A big ask.
Yes.
So, my background is I went to Edinburgh University. I did a master's degree in geography. And coming out of university, there wasn't really a clear direction on what to go into.
Mm,
So, I took up a graduate training scheme with a company called Tarmac, who are a large quarrying company. And at the time, I was young, I was very excited about utilizing my geography degree. So I thought I would go into the regeneration of quarries. I actually ended up in their business development team. So
wow.
my time at Tarmac was spent pitching for multi-million dollar contracts with the business development team. And I always thought, looks a lot more fun to be the other side of the table, in that regard. And at the time, I had a good friend who was working for Kraft on their procurement um, program, their graduate scheme, and he said to me, "I think this would be great for you, Gemma.
Yeah,
You know, you love solving a problem, you love numbers, you love kind of working with people, and that's what you'll get to do." So I applied to a specialist graduate recruitment agency and landed my first position at a large white label food manufacturing company based in Leeds
yeah,
on their graduate training scheme,
yeah.
and went straight in as a buyer for direct packaging.
Well, there you go. So that was quite a swift move from university, and as well, I think a lot of people don't say that enough, but making that connection is quite interesting. The way you portrayed it around being on the other side of the table, because often, people who maybe haven't started a career see this world of like someone talks about, oh yes, I'm engaging with my clients and having discussions and all of that, but actually you are the client, which is one of the great facets of procurement. You are the actual person who's able to have that sway and decision making with the supplier. So it does bring a level of, sheen and nice things about it as well. So
It does. I think in hindsight, if somebody had told me that it wasn't that buy-in was actually a very small element of the role that you do, and actually the vast majority of the job is selling
it's selling.
internally, not so much externally,
Yeah.
I maybe would have considered it. But I've been very fortunate
Yeah.
to have had 20 fantastic years in procurement and have had the opportunity to both buy and sell,
Yeah.
externally and internally.
Yeah. So paint us a picture. You walk into that first role in procurement. You've had good work experience. You've done sales. So in a way, the
Yeah.
other side of things. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, you can think, right, I probably thought to myself, right, I know how sales operates. Now I have to do the other side of the thing. Um, what was your immediate impact into that you noticed? What were the things that you noticed which were different to maybe what you had expected, and what were the great things that you saw in that first role?
Look, I'm forever grateful for the 2 years where I really honed my procurement skills at Northern Foods. It's a food manufacturing business. It's low margin. It's fast paced. It was a multi-branded, multi-site organization, and they really threw you in at the deep end. I had a fantastic manager at the time, and you were given autonomy.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a shock to the system. It was going in there, and right from day one, you were in front of the C-suite of
Yeah.
that factory, of that brand, of that business, and you had to sit there and you had to justify the value you were bringing and how you were making sure that their third-party costs, their goods, were coming in as competitively priced as possible. It's a very tough industry. And it was hard graft, and I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time on the road. I spent a lot of time in the factories, in the sites, building relationships, understanding my stakeholders, understanding what I was buying. But it was a really fantastic opportunity to really understand the true end-to-end cost of goods that you're selling to consumers,
Yeah.
and the importance of margin and the impact of inflation and increases in costs of goods when you're procuring for a large organization.
And again, there you mentioned some really, really interesting things that maybe people should consider or do not even consider when you're in the throes of it, which is you're in a role which gives you that access to a whole host of different roles within a firm, as well as then interfacing with some of the most senior people on the other side. So you are, as you say, speaking straight to C-suites, and you may have just had maybe a few years of experience of working. The exposure is quite incredible, right? And I imagine though at that point in time you were just experiencing it, so you're going through it. But there must have been also skills that I think I can tell which ones they are. You've said it as well. Skills that in hindsight you look at that you already had, which gave you an advantage of being able to undertake that role. Could you like elaborate on those for us?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. It was really putting you outside of your comfort zone. And I
Yeah.
think the naivety of youth helps in that regard, but also having a really strong mentor and manager in that space, and the responsibility that they gave me at that time to own that category. And I'm a details person. I like data. I like numbers. I'm a problem solver. I really upskilled myself to be the category expert when I was managing those categories. And that builds that credibility when you go into those factories. But I also lent heavily, without realizing it, on the fact that actually I've been working since I was 13.
Yeah.
I'm very proudly working class background in a lot of customer facing roles, which at the time you do. And I'd managed people more senior to me. I'd had to adapt how I work with people. And it put me in really good stead when I went into that organization because I was able to flex my style. So, with the guidance of the more senior team, when you're a more junior member, I had the opportunity to really learn how you engage at a C suite level, but also how you engage with the people on the factory floor as well. And
Yeah.
that's a real skill to be able to truly understand what's important to different people and
Yeah.
how you're selling your proposition, because we go back to it's all about the sales pitch, how you're selling your solution to those individuals and why they should buy into
Yeah.
your recommendation, be it value engineering, the packaging, or sourcing from a new supplier. You've got to get that buy-in from the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an incredible role to play. And as you say, it's all about the sales and the skills that you had. It sounds like obviously you had a lot of curiosity, which was a
Yes.
strength of yours, because to get into the detail, you want to have that curiosity. And it was something you probably leveraged on and worked on. Again, at that point, maybe you weren't introspectively looking at it, but you were effectively just doing what you were curious about and interested
Yes.
about. And, something that you also said there, which is quite strong, is every job and role that you previously had prior to that role being undertaken contributed towards it. So, I think leveraging every skill that you've learned along the way is a powerful thing to do. And I think that's what you are effectively saying there.
100%. I think people just want to fast track their
Yeah.
career these days. And actually, what I learned in those 7 years of working across food and beverage, hospitality, retail really meant that I was able to work with a huge range of individuals at different levels. And I think that's a skill that you need to hone over time. So, yeah.
And use the energy you probably had at
Yeah.
that point in time to like run around and be as curious as possible.
Yes,
Which is
and yeah, and to get into that detail
get
and to
into that detail.
learn.
Yeah, yeah.
Learner is, one of my top strengths, and I love to learn new things. So it really played into that side of my personality.
That's awesome. So, packaging as well. That's what you're
Yes.
doing. So the other trait, learning, one of the things which I know for anyone doing direct procurement and even indirects when you first start as well is that learning skill of learning things which you never thought of before. That must have been interesting as well. How did you ensure that you were contributing in those situations? Because you would have dealt with quite technical people. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, at that point in time, maybe not thinking of it, but if you go back and think on that first role, I was actually quite good at doing X, Y, Z.
You're exactly right. I think looking back at it now, what you get with youth and naivety and a keen interest to learn is you ask questions.
Yep.
You ask questions and you listen, and you don't go in there with an expectation that people think you know the answers. So for me, I wasn't going in there to become the subject matter expert. They were the experts. It wasn't about trying to tell them how to do their job. It was about going in there from a procurement point of view and from that position of I'm working multi-site, I'm working multi-brand. I have the luxury of spending my time looking for better suppliers, whereas you have to spend your time delivering those goods off the end of that factory line. So I'm here to say, look, here are some solutions, here are some alternatives. Can we trial them? How can we make your life easier? And how can we deliver more margin to this business?
Yeah, that's great, and that's the powerful thing of working within the direct space, especially on the manufacturing side. So take us on to the next step or phase of your career.
Yes, so I left Northern Foods
Yeah.
and migrated south to London. And I got my first role in indirect procurement with Marks and Spencer.
The big smoke and a completely different brand. Well, it's connected to food, of course. But
yes, well, we did supply Marks and Spencer with their food
there you go.
through the white label manufacturer, and obviously Marks and Spencer. It's
Can I ask you a question?
name. Yes.
Did you that move? Because this is something that probably people are curious. What foods to Marks and Spencer? Was there a connection that you got this new role, or was it completely?
It was completely unconnected. I went to London. I had role offers from Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer, and I was really connected to them. It was the earlier stages of my career, so I was in that buyer level.
Of course.
And both of those organisations were looking to bring in people who had between 2 to 3 years experience buying, but to come in and really train them through the ranks. So I went into Marks and Spencer, and suddenly it scaled up. That was much bigger. So Marks and Spencer at the time, we were managing around £2 billion indirect spend. We worked on projects above 250K only, which was probably the entirety of my category spend when I was doing the level of detail at Northern Foods. It was a really step into the strategic procurement space. And what I learned at Marks and Spencer was best in class RFP process, best in class tendering, best in class supplier relationship management, and a real opportunity to get involved in huge projects, one of which was the migration off the Amazon platform. So M&S's old website was really just Amazon branded M&S, and they built from scratch their new website, and I was the procurement lead on that. So really fantastic opportunity and exposure to get involved in a key transformation project.
It is definitely one of the key roles within procurement that from a category point of view. So for those who are wondering, she's working in packaging and then moved into an indirects category, right? Give us a sense of how you overcame that change, and also even just let's go down to the interview stage, right? When you were being interviewed for the role, what would you recommend to someone who's trying to go from directs to indirects and maybe has this concern about what can I bring to the table, because I'm not an IT expert and I don't know what I would necessarily do. What did you feel like you did back then to give them the certainty around she's the right person to help support us on this or take this role?
Yeah, I think passion goes a long way. So a real genuine interest to learn and to pick up a new skill. And I go back to it. We're not the subject matter experts in
Yes.
what we do. We're always partnering with subject matter experts.
Mm.
What we're the expert in is procurement and running that process and structuring that process. So when I was interviewing and to do that move, for me, obviously, I did my research. It's all about your research. I researched into what does indirect look like? How is that different? But I will say I had also had exposure to it.
Yeah.
So at Northern Foods, while I was buying direct goods, I worked within the indirect team. So I was used to that. And actually, a lot of the principles that sat alongside what I was doing, delivering year on year savings, delivering
Yes, of
value
course.
efficiency, managing a category, building a strategy plan, understanding market analysis, they're all very transferable skills that you move into when you go into a different area. And I think one of the benefits of procurement as a career choice is that actually you're very encouraged to look at different domains and to either, you can become a category expert or you can move your way across different category domains. And that's what I learned at Marks and Spencer is I went in and yes, I had to learn the IT category, but I knew the principles. And
Yeah.
what they were looking for was somebody who had curiosity, who had passion, who had drive, who wanted to learn and progress. And somebody as well, procurement is about people. It's about
Yeah.
engaging with people. It's about your ability to build relationships internally and with suppliers. And I'm hopeful that's what they saw in me when they interviewed me. Gosh, coming up 20 years ago now.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure that's exactly what would have been. And your point is very valid and well mentioned around the fact that it is not about you being the IT expert. It's actually bringing the other skills, which actually translate to straightforward descriptions that you just talked about: curiosity, being a good people person, being able to be detailed, bringing all that information accordingly, and it's easily transferable. So for anyone watching this and thinking, oh, how do I get that cert? How do I get that role, which is completely different, it's a completely different category? Actually, that's not what you need to focus on. Is focus on your strengths and leverage on those.
Yeah, people buy into people.
Exactly, 100%, 100%. So you're now in a role which has a significant expenditure, significant importance because it's a new website and they're moving away from. What did you notice as a marked difference in the type of stakeholders that you had to deal with, and what were the skills that you had to adopt in that role before we move on to your next phase of the career?
I would say it was more about honing the skills that I'd already learnt. It's about really learning to read people and to build a story and a value proposition for those individuals or for those stakeholders, and to really understand what their pain points are within their current role
Yeah,
and how they're working with suppliers.
yeah,
It wasn't necessarily new skill set, it was about honing my ability to influence individuals, my ability to build a strong story,
hmm.
build a business case, take them on the journey. And really, the art of procurement is to convince them it's their idea. So if you convince them that it's
There it
their
is.
idea to do something, then you're 90% of the way there. So that was the kind of learnings I had at Marks and Spencer. But then they were both very professional outfits. So the manufacturing organization, Northern Foods, we had very strict process on how we were going to run those tenders. And likewise, Marks and Spencers, it's scaled up, and actually, in one regard, it was a step away from the P&L. So at the manufacturing organisation, it was down to the penny, and that fed directly into the bottom line. Marks and Spencer, it's more strategic, so you're more reliant. You've less access to accurate data, so you are really reliant on working with the business to get the forecasting from them, and to build your business cases with, I guess, more assumptions in them.
Yeah, and that's quite an important aspect of moving into that indirect side with
Yes.
a spin on marketing. I know it's IT, but it's a spin on marketing as well, which is really important here. That you basically needed to grasp two categories in one, in a way.
Yes, definitely. And I did IT, and then I did in the marketing space at M&S and went into their
There you
digital
go.
marketing arena. So I took the skills that I'd learned in IT contracting and service level agreements, uptime availability. And as digital marketing was starting to expand, I was in a prime position then to make sure that when you were contracting with these marketing agencies that were working off digital platform, that we were embedding all of that good practice from IT
Yeah,
into those contracts.
yeah, and there must have been the need to keep that mentality of efficiency continuously as well, because I know Marks and Spencer maybe had a bigger budget and all the spend than the previous roles, but at the same time, it still needs it's one of those businesses like many other where the margins are sort of controlled, so you need to be quite effective at that as well. Do you feel like you brought those strengths into that role as well, and it was quite an important one because it kind of teeters between the
Yeah.
services and fast moving consumer goods, all that.
Oh, 100%. 100%. As I say, the foundation that I got from working in a manufacturing organization to take that into Marks and Spencer meant that I was really hot on my numbers.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
I knew the detail behind what I was presenting, and therefore you get the credibility and the buy-in from the business within
Okay.
that space.
That's great. And you were a very strong practitioner at that point in time.
Yes.
Did you start looking after people, managing people at that stage, or is that further on in your career?
That was further on. I did that at Burberry.
Burberry. So we'll get into that. And if now, so you went from the IT to then the digital marketing.
Yes.
Did that role evolve into other roles within Marks and Spencer?
It didn't. I was then headhunted.
And then you
So
were
I was
headhunted.
I was poached by Burberry.
Ah, so we're going
So,
into Burberry.
yes.
That's great. So prior to us moving to that stage, give us a bit of a summary at that point in time of your career and what you had learned that you would like to portray to the audience at this point.
I think at that point in my career, it is really about knowing your role in the
Yeah.
process. So, really becoming the expert in the value that you're bringing to the process. Going into that strategic negotiation space, the value I brought was how to run a best in class end to end sourcing program. And the learning that negotiations don't happen in one meeting, they don't happen in a 1 hour
Yeah.
process. Negotiations take months and months of planning, preparation. They're collaborative, they're teamwork. And that's what I really learned within that strategic IT space. It was about how do you structure very complex negotiations to make sure that both parties are coming out at the end
Mm.
in a place that they're comfortable with, but that you're delivering the value to the business. And at that stage in my career, I was a very competent buyer of highly complex IT categories and marketing categories, and really knew best in class processes in order to negotiate the best value for the organization.
Yeah. So you had honed your skills to be a great practitioner at that
Yes.
point in time, and these were the skills that you are taking forward. So I always like to go in straight into that area of the personal life, which comes into this, as well as self development and growth. So you portrayed a career which seemed like a lot of learning and self sort of pushing yourself beyond
Yeah.
your limits to learn things, to do things. But often there's mentorship and other people who've really influenced your life or your career to that
Mhm.
stage. Give us a sense around, what you learned out of that mentorship, and if there is any shout outs to anyone you want to do, you can, of course. But at that point in time, what was the value of good mentorship and good management, really, from those superior to you?
Yeah, so I think there's professional and there's personal
Yes, of
mentorship you
course.
get. So I grew up, my parents owned their own business, and
Ah,
they built a very well regarded business where I grew up.
yeah.
And I really learnt the importance of building relationships with your customers, having repeat business, and being seen as a trusted company. They were incredibly hardworking, and I really had that ingrained into me from a young age. And I saw how important it was to be honest in business while also building relationships
Yeah, of
and growing
course.
your organization. And all the employees who worked for my parents were incredibly loyal because they treated them so well.
Yeah.
So I had that foundation. Then in those first two kind of big career moves that I made at Northern Foods and at Marks and Spencer, I was fortunate enough to have really strong line management. So
Yeah.
I've mentioned it at first. My line manager at Northern Foods, she was a powerhouse, and she was really, really supportive in helping me build that foundation. She built my confidence, and she invested a lot of time in me in those early days to support me in my career. And I was very fortunate enough to have that. When I moved into the role at Marks and Spencer, it was a point in time that was very special. It was a very young, well, it was a dynamic team, and they were young. They were their 30s, 40s,
Ah.
so they are in my head, and they were really high performing, and they were very supportive team. With the procurement director at the time as well, invested a lot of time in softer skills within the team, and built a procurement excellence program within that team. So it was the first time I'd really had exposure to investment in my personal softer skills,
Yeah.
which is really important. And I also worked with a number of very experienced buyers who were subject matter experts in their category
Yeah.
areas. So I learned a lot from them in those early days as well.
Yeah. Sounds like you had a work hard, party hard team as well there.
Oh, we
given-
did, yes.
So, not opening that topic too much, but just in terms of your personal life, because it's really important for people to get this. This is not like careers like this, where such as yours, which are very successful. They're not just done by robots. They're done by human beings who may have had things going on in the background. Tell us a little bit of, maybe you were, you know, having your first kids. I don't know at that point in time. Tell us a little bit about that part of your career and how you manage that balance between the personal life and the career when you're moving into a brand like Burberry, which will open up.
In a way, I was actually fortunate that it wasn't until my recent role at L'Oreal where
Yeah.
my personal life became a little bit more complicated with the arrival of two young children. So when I was at my roles at M&S and Burberry, I only had myself to look after. Let's put it that way. So
That's
I was
perfect.
very lucky, and it was.
I miss those days, but
Yeah, I know. So no, it was a work hard, it was a play hard
yeah,
mentality,
great.
and the relationships that I built with my team members there at both of those organisations, I carry through with me today, and some of those individuals are my closest friends and confidants as well within the procurement industry. So yeah, the balancing act really was, how can I learn as much as I can learn?
Yeah.
How can I get as much exposure as I can get? And how can I get enough, I guess, mentorship within these organizations as possible?
Yeah, I think I'll ask you that question again when we move on to the L'Oreal
Yeah.
role. So, in terms of that next move and your career, could you actually, before we move into Burberry, which I am really keen to get an understanding of, is were there any surprises, learnings, mistakes? I wouldn't call them mistakes necessarily, but things that you didn't expect that you learned from that stand out in your time till that point in time of your career.
I think one of the common mistakes is that people think that procurement is just about cost selling,
Yeah.
cost reduction,
Yeah.
and it's not about saving money every time. So for me, I think going from Northern Foods, where it was a really strong focus on delivering that bottom line cost reduction we needed to, at M&S, the learning for me was really putting the right provider in place and building those partnerships with those suppliers and building long-term partnerships with suppliers at that more strategic level, so that you were seen as the customer of choice for them and that they were bringing that innovation. Because transitioning away a very complex spend within the IT space in particular is you don't change providers
Yeah.
that frequently, and it's not an easy job to do.
No,
So
of course.
for me, it was really about going, how do we maximize the value from our existing suppliers,
Mm.
as well as that kind of traditional, maybe a little bit more tactical,
Mm.
how do we find the next supplier who can give us the better price?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and it is true that sometimes that's what you feel like when you're doing your first few roles, that that's expected out of you. Oh, it's how do you bash them down and hammer them down? But it's not necessarily about that. It's about making sure you get the right service, and then of course it has to be at the right price. But it's how you manage that to make sure everything flows well from a service point of view.
Yeah.
And that segues really well into your next role. So you go into this incredibly luxurious brand, right?
Yes.
How was that adaptation? And in a way, you kind of, it seemed like you naturally went from the food industry to another one, which is a bit more high end, and then you had to deal with different set of suppliers. What did you see when you landed at Burberry, and what was that first impact like?
Yeah, so Burberry was a bit more of a bigger fish, smaller pond.
Yeah,
Again, because actually, although it was a global brand, it was a smaller footprint than Marks and Spencer,
yeah.
and I was back closer to the P&L. So I went into Burberry. I was headhunted to go into that role. I think because of the extent of IT and marketing and digital marketing background that I had, Burberry at the time were very digitally focused. They wanted to be the first luxury digital brand. So they wanted somebody who could come in. We shot the first runway on the iPhone.
Oh wow.
When I joined at Burberry, we took magic mirrors into stores. We did nail bars in stores. There was a lot of AV at the time. It was very, very cutting edge, and they wanted somebody to come into that IT space and really be able to blend across the marketing and the IT aspect of the category, which I had done.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting eye opener to see just what goes into running a luxury brand. At the time I joined, it was headed up by an American lady.
Hmm.
So it was also going from a very British brand to a global, very American
Yeah, yeah,
brand.
of course.
So that was a learning as well, as a learning curve. And there, because I had stepped up then into truly owning my category area, it gave me much greater exposure to the C-suite at Burberry and to negotiating deals on a global level rather than within that UK market.
So it sounds like this role that you went into had two factors which are not necessarily diametrically opposed to procurement or pricing, but at the same time, you could see that maybe some of the stakeholders you were dealing with were sort of conscious about that challenge, right? So you're going to the cutting edge part, which is doing the AV and the new stuff, first runway recording. It's amazing on the iPhone. And then at the same time, a very well known luxurious brand, which for anyone looking at it from a purchasing procurement point of view, it can be seen as, how do you avoid ensuring that you don't miss out that luxurious part of it, or that you don't dial down, or that you don't dilute the quality perception when you are having to, effectively try and be more cost effective where possible.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Burberry, when I joined there, is that they were at the end of what had been a real decade of growth.
Yeah.
So they had a supplier base that had grown with them.
Mm.
And so actually the challenge at Burberry was to make them more strategic and
Yeah.
more professional and challenge what they were doing, because actually were they working with the right providers, because they were with providers who had been working with them when they were a tenth of the size, and then they'd seen this exponential growth, and they have truly have the robust supplier base in place to be able to manage their new requirements going forward. So when you look at the luxury versus Marks and Spencer, actually the need to have, it's all about brands.
Yeah.
So yes, luxury is still luxury, and the end user experience at Burberry was vastly different to M&S. Like, they would not compromise on the quality of the boxes that their goods and that their products went into to their customers. That was key for them. It was an experience for them.
Of
The
course.
consumer is buying Burberry for the experience of buying it. So while we had to be mindful of that, but at the same time, they needed to professionalize their organization and they needed to look at their bottom line cost because they had scaled and the costs had scaled with them. And they hadn't really challenged if they were working with the right providers or not at that time.
So I think it goes back to what you just said earlier on around, it's not always just about cost. Actually, what you are looking at is effectiveness of the supply chain, given the exponential growth and if they have the right vendors so that the quality stays up and ensures that it's been managed in a way that it doesn't kind of lose control, I suppose.
Yeah. And that you've got resilience within the supply
Of
chain
course.
and that you're protecting the global brand as it became, more present.
Of
So,
course. That must have been an interesting sort of switch, or not a switch necessarily, but an interesting evolution of your role. In terms of stakeholders, there must have been not a market change, but there would have been a change in terms of the people. You probably bumped into quite a few people who had 10 years of success, feel very attached to that success that they've brought into, and therefore adapting some of these changes, which all make logical sense, and it's to their positive outcome, still maybe were resistant to all of the typical things you get in those situations. How did you adapt to that? What did you manage? How did you manage that? And give us some tips, really, on how to do that
yeah,
job better.
the tips are you need to be authentically yourself and you need to really be coming at it from the right angle,
Yeah,
which is a genuine desire to help them
yeah,
spend their money more wisely
yeah.
and to get a better service. So I think for me, in all of my roles within procurement, it's been the key aspect of being successful within procurement is being able to build relationships with your stakeholders,
Yeah.
with the business, really understanding their pain points, and then working with them to find the solution.
Mm.
And also opening their eyes to looking at something from a different angle. Particular, we had one provider that they were working with the IT team have been working with for a number of years that supported their AV in store. And as they had grown exponentially, this provider had grown with them.
Of course.
And really 80% of their business was off the back of of Burberry.
Burberry.
And for me, actually, it was educating them that that wasn't only a risk to Burberry, it was a risk to that provider, but also were they really well equipped now to be managing an account of this size and how could we work with them? So
Mhm.
it's always been building relationships with people, with your stakeholders. And I'd had a lot of experience with IT guys at Marks and Spencer. So when I went into Burberry and they were my key stakeholders, fortunately enough for me, I'm northern. I get along with most people, so
Yeah.
I managed to build relationships with them,
Yeah.
and we
And you
we
spoke their
did some.
language as well by then, so which is
Yeah,
good.
spoke their language. I thought, brought that credibility with me,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think they really understood that I was looking to help them.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier on that this was when you were starting to get into management as well.
Yes.
And you're now switching from practitioner to management and building a highly effective team. Tell us how that experience went by and what you learned out of that.
Yes. So my second role at Burberry was to head up actually the marketing team. And that was when Burberry had bought back their beauty license.
Okay.
Hence we get into L'Oreal. And I think how they found me. So they had their beauty arm, so their makeup had been managed by a third party. They bought that license back in house and they were essentially then a startup within Burberry. And I went into that role and then had a team of individuals beneath me that I had to manage as we then went to source everything you needed to source in order to sell our makeup products to our consumers. At that point, I was managing people who were subject matter experts. So I had a packaging buyer beneath me. He was more senior. He was older than I was, and he was also an expert in his
Therefore,
field.
got it.
I then brought in a consultant who was a marketing expert to support on a media spend, and I had two other individuals in my team. And it was at that point that I really needed to learn how do you lead a team when you're not the most senior or the most experienced.
Experience, yeah.
But again, I think that went back to my earlier days in my part-time jobs where I'd held a number of positions of supervisor roles on shop fronts or in restaurants where I had to manage teams of people who were more senior. So I wouldn't say I was excellent at it from day one. It's
Yeah,
been a
okay.
steep learning curve over the last 15 years, but I always try to build relationships with people and build those personal relationships and work together as a team. And I think that's really stood me in good stead in managing people.
Interesting topic. I want to slightly open up this one around building great relationships, especially with the teams, right? There's always that saying around, oh, people will probably have told you this, you're not their friend, but you are, their manager, all of that good stuff. Um, what was your experience on that? Because I probably have a slightly different approach to this, and I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
I think you can definitely build personal relationships with people in your team and you can get along as colleagues and friends. And I think it's really important that you do that and you open up and you have that vulnerability that with people that you work with, because if you don't share that vulnerability, you're never going to get that true trust from each other.
Yeah,
And nobody's perfect. However, there is a line that you can't
of
cross.
course.
And it's important not to cross that line and also to make sure then that you keep a level of professionalism to the role. But I think if you do, when you build that relationship with your team and when you have that trust, you are in a position where you can really give honest, critical feedback. And somebody will listen and they will take it in the vein that you're wanting them to take it in, which is to improve them.
Yeah,
I always think of the analogy of a sports team.
yeah,
A sports coach will give you critical feedback of what you're doing wrong because he wants you to get better. You do it with your children. You tell them what they're
yeah.
doing that's not right to help them get better. So that's always been my approach.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important point because often you get this scenario where people don't know where to necessarily draw the line. Sometimes they expand
Yeah.
too much one way or the other, and what you're saying there. What I take from that is you need to know them well enough, build a good relationship well enough to be able to give valuable feedback when you do. But when you are giving the hard messages, you have to have that relationship, which is not so close that it feels like it's a completely destructive bit of feedback for them. And it actually gives you the opposite impact where they distance themselves completely and maybe you turn off that team member.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
And in a way, it gets easier the bigger your team
Yeah, of course. Of
to do
course.
that.
Of
So,
course, of course. And little tip here, like what would you say is the ideal size that you need to manage yourself as a manager before it starts becoming complicated? Because I'm sure there are people thinking about that.
well, then you're asking the question, are you a manager or a leader?
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're a manager, I think really maximum you can do is 4 or 5 people to be able to truly invest in those individuals. And then as a leader, that's when you manage indirectly through your direct reports.
Perfect. That's exactly what I think good leadership shows. So great. So you were learning quite a few good skills there. You had to deal with the C-suite, a very important category, had to lead a team, quite a lot of things.
Yes.
And you were probably riding high, doing really well. And then the next role comes in, right?
Yeah. Then L'Oreal came knocking. So, yes, I was fortunate enough to be approached by my ex-boss now at L'Oreal. He needed somebody to come in and head up the indirect procurement team. So it was a big step up for me. I was going from just one single, marketing and IT category exposure to marketing, IT, and then the business corporate services across L'Oreal's UK and I business. And I took that position on and immediately went from a team of 4 to a team of 12 people that I managed at L'Oreal. And I did that role for 3 years with a director above me. And then when he left the business, I stepped up into his position, and I've been doing the role as a director of procurement now for the last 6 years.
That's a big role to fill.
Hmm.
You did by way of introduction in terms of the company. Now that is a next step up in terms of the management of it. Highly technical, highly capable, highly important brand you were at, which had been through growth. Now you are, making sure that that level of quality of the brand is being kept up. Now you're then taking this, multiplying to a lot of different brands, whilst also managing a bigger team, whilst also having to deal with other colleagues in other territories who also have their importance. So tell us, what steps did you initially take when you took up this bigger role within L'Oréal, as in taking up your boss's role, to make sure you had a good start to that role? For those who are maybe about to go into a big role like that, what would you say your advice is, and what steps would you take in? You can talk about the 30-day, 90-day plan, whatever it is, makes sense for you.
And so for me, I was taken on that role, but the organization itself and the team needed to go on a transformation journey, as I mentioned briefly at the start. So when I took the role on, were very heavily invested in the retail and promotional spend. And at the time, what we classed as bricks and mortar was the key driver of our sales for the organization. Over the last 10 years, we've seen that shift into digital and online, and marketing and digital has become the number one route to market for us. So, my role at L'Oreal, when I went in there, first of all, I needed to fix the situation that was in place at the time.
Mhm.
So the team that were there, as I mentioned, were very tactical. They were seen as blockers by the business, and they
Mm,
didn't really have very good relationships with the
mm,
organization. I had had experience of multi-branded organizations before, so the
mm.
complexity of L'Oreal, while it is a shock to the system of most people because it is incredibly complicated,
Yeah.
I had had that exposure before, so I understood the need to adapt and flex your approach to the different brands, the different divisions. But it was really about bringing the team on the journey and building the relationship with the business, and them seeing us and trusting us as business partners and involving us in the process. At the time I joined, we were always brought in at the 11th hour, or we'd put a supplier in place and then we weren't mandated. So they just didn't use them and they would ignore us. And so over the last 10 years, it's been a multifaceted transformation program. It's been bringing in digital tools and technology to enable us to manage the spend. So truly understand what we're spending, where, with who, is really important. And for a number of years, we were only able to do that retrospectively based on what had been spent. So
Mm.
then it's very difficult to change behavior. Since the investment in new platforms and technology, we now are embedded in the approval process. So we're further up that funnel, which helps to drive compliance to our preferred supply list, but they're only compliant if you've got the right relationships with
Yeah,
the
of course.
business. So then it was really about upskilling the team in how to influence and deliver change within a complex organization and how to build those relationships. When I joined L'Oreal, they would run tender processes without anyone from the business involved.
Wow.
It was
That's
bizarre.
that's
And then
wild.
they were
Yeah.
surprised when people didn't want to
Didn't
work with
accept
their
it.
suppliers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So the key thing for me, having come from three large organizations where it was core to the success of the team
Yeah.
that you had that stakeholder relationship, that was my number one priority, was
Mm.
how do we build trust and credibility with our stakeholders, and how do we get out into the business with our stakeholders when there are a lot of them. And I think that's a challenge at L'Oreal. It's a very complex organization. You have a huge pool of stakeholders that you have to engage with on all of your projects. There's a representative from every single brand. So that's 40 times everything that you're doing. So I restructured the team. And we went from being a category focused only team to having half the team as category focused and half the team as business partners. So that really meant that for each of the 4 divisions within the organization, they had one point of contact. So
Yeah.
it meant that they had more confidence in coming to us, but also that they felt they were being listened to.
Yeah.
Because when you're working in complex organizations where you've got multiple stakeholders against each project, the ones with the smaller budgets always tend to feel left out. So the importance for me is building those business partner roles so that they really truly understand what the business is spending, what the business needs are, and then using my category team as the experts to look at the external market and bring them in. And then underpin all of that with technology and tools to enable you to actually run that process.
That's a good segue again into something which probably at this stage now that we are kind of getting to your current position as such, um, procurement's evolving quite heavily.
Yeah.
The typical question that I do need to ask you, especially at this point in time, is around AI and how that is what your perception of it is in terms of influence that you expect it to have in what we do.
I think AI is a hugely exciting space to be in. I think we need to be mindful of its infancy. It's only been around for 3 to 4 years, so
Yeah.
it's younger than my eldest child, and it's changing very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the key thing is, it's there will always be a need to have the human in the loop. But what AI can do for us is it can take away a lot of the noise. Everyone is now being asked to do more with less. So if we can use AI to support on the more tactical aspect of our role, on a lot around the contract element that we can utilize AI on, the procure to pay aspect, raising those purchase orders. If we can free up buyers' time and if we can help them as well to build more robust documentation quicker, then it's got a huge benefit to us as a procurement function. And who knows what the future holds? I'm very open minded. I have a a working group within my team at the moment exploring how we can use AI to really maximize the value from the tools that we've got in place. So not necessarily about putting more layers in, but really using plugins to extract as much value from the tools and platforms that we've got
Yeah.
that will then enable us to free up time for procurement to build and capitalize on those people to people relationships and keep that, human aspect to the role.
That's amazing, and it's great to hear. And I've got the fortune that in my team we've got one of those gurus of tech who's worked in some of the big Silicon Valley type companies who describes AI, which is something I love to share, as very fast. And it's now at that teenage level, which is a very good connection to what you said. So lots of potential, highly capable. You can see them becoming, but they're still developing. So I
Yeah.
think that probably aligns itself. So final question for you, which we like to ask to people as we get to this stage of their career, is someone who's watching this and going, I'd love to work with Gemma, or what would I learn from Gemma? What are the things you'd like to tell someone who's watching this saying, this is what you'd gain from me?
You would gain a insight into somebody who is very curious, who loves to learn, who
Yeah.
loves to challenge how things are done, who loves to solve problems, and who wants to make a genuine shift change in how we work and how we operate, but who wants to bring people along on the journey with them. And I have a procurement excellence program that I adopted from my time at Marks and Spencer that I brought into L'Oreal, and it's really focused around building the talent within my team.
Mhm.
I've moved into many different roles within my career, and the key thing for me is to build talent within procurement, but to build talent within individuals themselves as well. And that's a huge part of my role as a leader, is to support the talent within my team and to really get the best out of them and to
Yeah.
share my learnings and to create an environment where they can really grow and make the most of their skill set.
That's great. So curiosity is a big feature in your career to date, and I think that level of detail is driven by that. So for anyone watching this, I'm sure they'll say, I've got that trait. I'm sure I could do well in it. It's definitely a career to be had. So
Yes,
Gemma, thanks for your time. It was really good to hear that, and thanks again for everything you've shared.
no problem. Thank you.
Cheers. In this series, we have been very fortunate to bring to the fore the stories of some of the great procurement and supply chain leaders. If you feel like you have a great story to share with us, do reach out, as we'd love to share your story with everyone in the community.